Can you expand on just the process for obtaining historic tax credits and usually, what that looks like? Are developers acquiring those and then selling them to banks, or is that, not the typical process? That's my general understanding.
Yeah, I think that happens all the time. I think as quickly as I can say it and simply, you have to have an eligible building, which most of St. Louis is. There's pockets that aren't, but a lot of, if it's a historic building in a historic district, it's usually eligible. And so you buy a building like this, you're going to usually have a big construction piece because they usually need a lot of rehab or something like that. There's a federal tax credit program, historic tax credit program, and a state historic tax credit program. For the state, you got to spend 50% of your basis in the project. And for the federal, you got to spend 100%. Most of the time when you're like converting an old warehouse to apartments, you blow that out of the water, so it's no problem at all. But you get, on the state side, you get 25% back as a tax credit that you can sell after you receive it. It's transferable is what they call it. You can sell it to banks, buy it. Accounting firms buy them. Individuals, if they're large enough, buy those tax credits. So you usually get like 90, we've gotten as high as like 93 cents on the dollar for those. And so that comes in as cash, you can use that to pay down your construction loan and convert to permanent at that point. And then on the federal side, it's a little more complicated, but you get a 20% tax credit. And that is now earned, the rules have changed, but now that's now earned over 5 years. So 4% each year for 5 years. And that is not transferable. So it's got to flow up through the ownership percentages. You can bring in federal investors that inject cash. It's a little more complicated. That's the basics of it, and makes economics work on historic buildings. A lot of people think, these programs just get developers rich, and it's like historic rehabs costs like almost as much as new construction, sometimes more, just because of what's required to, how the masonry is and stuff like that. So they're very necessary. Otherwise, I don't think a lot of St. Louis would be preserved, the architecture how it has. So that's my simple. I don't know if that was very simple, but that's my simple answer.
It was not as simple as you think, but it was pretty simple. So if I understand correctly,
sorry,
you're buying a building for, let's say, $1 million.
Yes.
If you're going to spend at least $1 million renovating,
yes,
then you can apply for the state and federal tax credits.
Yeah. So if you buy a building for $1 million, you got to spend at least $1 million to get the federal, and and 500,000 would qualify you for the state, essentially. Okay.
And so then the federal was 20%. Is that right?
Federal's 20%.
State was
25%.
25. So like that state 25%. So call it 250,000.
Yep.
You can sell that to a bank potentially for like 90 cents on the dollar, and then put that towards the renovation or the loan or whatever.
It offsets cost is another way to think of it. But yes, that's correct. And then 20%. So on $1 million, you get 200 grand back as a federal tax credit. Some people use them if they on a smaller scale project, but you can get a federal investor to come in and pay you for those. So that's how it works. It's a great program. It, like any government program, there's red tape and there's consultants, which is, a business, but I think that it is a great tool for developers to use if you have a historic building that you're looking at.
I would agree with that. And I also agree with your point about the costs of doing a historic renovation. I also don't think any of those projects happen without these types of programs.
Yeah.
Because it's not only the cost, the brain damage.
Yeah.
It's so much easier to go and build new versus, doing the work to preserve some of these beautiful old buildings.
Yeah. It's funny because my whole world has been in the historic, redevelopment side. So like that, I tend to think that's easier because I just don't know that much about new construction. So, but I know what you mean. It's like new construction, everything's, optimized to fit, it's just, you build it the right dimensions so that everything works. In old buildings, it's like you have weird angles and stuff, and you gotta know what you're doing, or have a good architect or a general contractor to help you not go crazy over budget. So,
and the scale factor, you can scale with new development, I think, a lot easier because every project can more or less look the same if you want it to.
Yeah, template, right.
And with the redevelopments, I doubt any two projects are going to look the exact same.
That's a great point. Yeah, that does make it hard. So I think all of this to say, those tax credit programs are very necessary, and not just like a way to get developers rich. It actually it's necessary to keep the historic fabric of our buildings intact. So yeah.